Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. A major legal and constitutional battle is now brewing in Alberta. The Alberta Prosperity Project and Stay Free Alberta are in full panic mode as we speak. Now, as separatists push forward with a campaign to gather signatures for a referendum on Alberta's independence, Indigenous leaders are pushing back, arguing the entire process violates their constitutional rights. First Nation leaders are taking the issue to court. At the center of this growing legal battle is the Sturgeon Lake First Nations people, which has launched a challenge aimed at stopping the independence petition process connected to Alberta Prosperity Project. Their argument is simple, but very powerful. You cannot decide the future of treaty lands without the treaty people. The controversy stems from a citizen-led effort to hold a referendum on whether Alberta should separate from Canada. Under Alberta's Citizen Initiative law, if enough signatures are collected within the required time frame, the province could be forced to hold a referendum asking Albertans whether they want independence. Supporters argue that Albertans deserve the right to determine their own political future, but critics say the initiatives overlook a fundamental legal reality. Much of Alberta exists on land governed by historic treaties between First Nation and the Crown, and those treaties are constitutionally protected. That is where Sturgeon Lake First Nation enters the picture. The First Nation has filed a legal challenge seeking to halt the referendum initiative process entirely. The argument centers on Section 35 of the Canadian Constitution, which recognizes and affirms existing Aboriginal and treaty rights. According to their legal position, any move towards Alberta separating from Canada would fundamentally affect those treaty relationships. And because those treaties were signed between First Nations and the Crown, not the provincial government, First Nations say their consent is legally required before any such constitutional change can be considered. In other words, a province cannot simply vote its way out of treaty obligations that existed long before the province itself was created. For Sturgeon Lake First Nation leaders, the issue is not just political, it is also constitutional and historical. Alberta is governed by several historic treaties, including treaties 6, 7, and 8, and these agreements were signed between First Nations and the British Crown in the late 1800s, decades before Alberta became a province in 1905. Today, those treaties remain legally binding and are protected under Section 35 of the Constitution Act. First Nations leaders argue that a provincial referendum cannot override those agreements. From their perspective, the independence movement is attempting to make decisions about land, governance, and sovereignty without recognizing the treaty partners who were there first. Some Indigenous leaders have warned that any attempt to move forward without proper consultation could trigger major constitutional litigation and possibly even Supreme Court involvement. The legal challenge from Sturgeon Lake First Nation is now becoming part of a much broader national debate. Supporters of the independence initiative say the petition is simply a democratic process allowing Albertans to express their will. But Indigenous leaders say democracy cannot ignore constitutional rights and treaty obligations. Their position is that any serious discussion about Alberta's political future must include the First Nations whose territories make up much of the province. And without that consultation, they argue, the entire process could be legally invalid. The push for an Alberta independence referendum is already controversial in itself, but the legal challenge brought forward by the Sturgeon Lake First Nation adds a powerful new dimension to the debate. It raises fundamental questions about sovereignty, treaty rights, and who truly has authority to decide Alberta's future. As the court begins to examine these arguments this April 7th, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The future of Alberta cannot be discussed without addressing the treaties and the First Nations, whose rights are protected within Canada's Constitution. And how that question is resolved would shape not only Alberta's political future, but Canada's constitutional future as well. Now, what do you think about the legal battle brewing against the push towards Alberta's independence? Drop your comment below, and I'll see you in the next video.